Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's University Business web seminar, which is entitled 4 Ways to Keep Campuses Connected, Seamless and Secure Identity Experiences for Higher Education Systems, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor, Okta. Now, before we get started, I would like to just share a few housekeeping items with you all here today. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and type your message if you're having any technical issues, and I should get to you shortly. If you don't have computer speakers, or maybe you prefer to listen privately, then you can please dial the phone number and access code that I just posted in the chat window a few moments earlier. Today, we will also be welcoming any questions you have today with a Q&A session, which will take place at the end of the presentation. To submit a question, please use the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen, like the chat panel, and send your questions to all panelists, which should be the default option. If you don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, just look to the right of your screen once again and click on what you should find an expand triangle, which is located directly in front of the panel name to make sure you have access to it. Also, something important to note, if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who registered and as well who's attending today will receive an email with a link to the slide and an archive recording. Now, before I introduce our main speaker today, I would just like to say that this web seminar, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So in addition to myself asking some questions with our guests today, there will be polls throughout the presentation that we would really love it if you could participate in. Also, one last thing really quick, in addition to the Q&A, please feel free to send us any feedback in the chat panel to all panelists. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker today. We have Wes Avett, who is the Regional Manager of Higher Education over at Okta. Hi, Wes. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. Excellent. So I will just start off with a little background. I am based in Cary, North Carolina, just outside of our capital, Raleigh. Spent the last 12 years plus supporting higher education. Came over to Okta about 2 years ago as we started up our dedicated higher education team, and just really excited about this space and what we're doing with universities and colleges, and happy to have this conversation with you today. We'll talk specifically about the core concept of empowering these education systems, but there could be core systems, a university system, a college system, could be a large multi-campus system, but we'll have content that will address an individual campus as well. So hopefully you'll find some meaningful takeaways as we talk through this, no matter what part of an organization you're with. And as you can tell from my video and this picture, the pandemic has aged me a little bit, but I'm happy to be here at least as close to live as can with you all.
All right, perfect. So like I said just a few minutes ago, we really want to make today's session more interactive and cater to your likely interest. So here's our first poll for today. I'm going to put that up in a few moments. But as you can see, what role is the closest to your area of responsibility? And let me just open that now.
Yeah, we'll do our best to cater some of the conversation to folks' roles.
All right, their answers are coming in. All right. Let me share them. All right, you should see them momentarily.
Okay, excellent. Nobody on security side. Okay. We will keep that part limited. We'll just do some highlights. We won't do a deep dive into cybersecurity. So thank you very much for that. So I'll move on to the next slide. For anyone that doesn't know who Okta is probably a good frame of reference as I go in and talk about these concepts. But Okta's an identity as a service provider. So a cloud-based application that is purpose-built to make it easy to integrate any technology for any user for an organization. And in higher education, that can get really complicated because there's so many different groups and roles that people play across the ecosystem of a higher education institution. We've got students, faculty, staff, students that are employees, faculty that take classes, alumni, guests, you name it, parents. There are so many different individuals and groups of people that need to get access to different applications managed by an institution, and then magnify that times however many systems or, campuses are within a system. It can get really complicated and hard to manage. And that's exactly what Okta is doing, is making that a much more seamless, secure process for folks. I wanted to start the content off at the macro level, and you really can't start at the macro level without talking about the impact that the pandemic has had. And literally 5 minutes before we got on today, was listening to EDUCAUSE video about this the implications of the pandemic on lasting remote work and remote learning. And this article from Harvard Business Review that was published November timeframe by Sean and Jason really was talking to that and these implications. And, you know, while in one sense, higher education is on the cutting edge side of technology for research, for learning, as an infrastructure, by large part, it's behind the times, and it has a big structure and a IT infrastructure that is based on legacy technologies, a lot of custom built processes, part of it due that the institutions themselves are old. And so as you build these capabilities out before there are tools that are out there and available, like an email, you build out an email capability, these processes have to get built, but over time they start to weigh in. And right now, as Sean and Jason alluded to, there are a lot of things around the technology infrastructure in higher ed that are really people intensive. They also highlighted this idea of, only under 5% of budgets are dedicated to IT spending. About a third of students are taking online courses, and that was pre-pandemic. This has grown tremendously. So there's going to be investment in IT. And Stephen, I think really part of what they were focusing on is prioritizing this digital strategy and moving that up from technology being a critical element to invest in that's tying into the mission of the organizations.
Yeah, thanks for that. So tell me a little bit about that digital strategy. I mean, what do you feel like it means to a university or college?
Yeah, it can be a daunting kind of task to look at, but it really breaks it down. Technology certainly is a portion of that, but it's looking at modernizing the approach, the people, the process, the business processes themselves, the culture of integrating technology in all that they do, and thinking about how they're interacting with users from a digital perspective as well. And this isn't a new concept. EDUCAUSE has been working to support IT leaders around digital transformation for a few years now as a priority. And the focus from a technology perspective is really around enabling an infrastructure that is agile and flexible, that can change, that can adapt and bring on new technologies. And Stephen, almost 70% of IT leaders are looking at creating simplified administrative processes and simplifying their technologies.
If I can just jump in real quick, about simplification, that, really jumped out at me. Does that translate to, fewer capabilities?
You know, there in some of the conversations we've had, there definitely have been points where they've built out a lot of capabilities, and some of it ends up not getting used or only used by a very few people. And I could see in some cases where they may reduce some of those things that aren't critical, that are nice to haves, looking at a cost, benefit ratio. But I think really their focus is on deduplicating things, streamlining processes. The idea of multiple people having to get involved to make changes where things can get automated is really where this focus is on the simplification of how the business processes tie to the technology processes. So thinking about identity and where does it fit in this, digital strategy, and back to the real core point of this conversation is identity can really enable cutting edge digital experiences. And this is really critical as we think of more and more folks interacting with our institutions from a digital perspective. There's so much investment made on physical brick and mortar experience of an institution. And it's going to be critical that as a student comes on and maybe the only engagement they have with your institution is online, that experience has to be phenomenal. It needs to really indicate the organization and your priorities and your brand. And it can't just be a learning management system or a class. Students interact with somewhere between 40 and 60 different applications through their education journey with an institution. So it's really critical to have a personalized experience so that as they come on board, if they're a nursing student, they are given specific applications that nursing students need, not what an engineering student would need, that they are communicated with about how to go get access to that. And when they move through their experience, it's a simple flow. They automatically go through. They have self-service capabilities to request help, to request new applications, to reset their phone number if they need a new MFA factor, they get a new phone, or if they need to change their password, they don't have to call a help desk and stay online. They really want a customized experience, and identity is critical to that. Identity also, a modern identity, can also really help from that infrastructure perspective. Having things in the cloud to be able to plug into a standards-based infrastructure enables folks to spend less time in IT just keeping the systems up and running and a server maintained, and being able to spend that time on things that are going to be really productive. Also has a lot of integration capabilities to facilitate automation of processes and critical in that overall IT modernization. And then, of course, helping protect from threats. Over 80% of attacks are really based on stolen or lost credentials. And having a good, strong password, multi-factor authentication helps from that perspective. But it also, modern identity also plays into the overall security posture. There's so much that goes around defending the network, into cloud-based data, all sorts of applications that are out there, and having a centralized modern identity platform to feed data in and out of those systems to be able to respond to threats more quickly, to respond to compliance needs is mission critical in that flexible enablement, and to help protect the environment and privacy of the students and faculty and staff.
All right, great. I'm going to jump right in again and just mention to everyone that I've just launched our next poll. Just something we really want is we're curious to get your thoughts on what is driving, or maybe I should say what you feel should be driving technology modernization at your institution. So you should see those now.
Yeah, thanks everyone for responding. It definitely is nice to have a little of an interaction with everyone here remotely.
All right, perfect. Gonna share these now.
Okay. Not not a huge surprise there, but really around that digital experience. But I think with everything in higher education, there's cost trade-offs to do everything. So we'll talk about both of these as we move forward. So thank you for that. In thinking about modernizing infrastructure and modernizing identity, um, it's really a unique position from an investment perspective. It's a rare case where you can improve user experience, you can improve security, and reduce cost. Today in education, there is just so much manual effort around managing users, managing processes that can be addressed to reduce cost. And I want to really highlight this idea down here is identity is a business enabler. It is really hard to bring on new technologies when you have to spend a lot of time figuring out how you're going to get everyone connected securely to it. So, especially on the commercial side, there's been a huge focus on modernizing identity platforms to enable business movement, business flexibility, and addressing new opportunities. And that's what we're seeing from a higher ed now, really digging into that. From that business case perspective, I like this slide to just give a high level of what are the areas that we could expect from return from identity, right? It's not something people think. They usually think about just a cost associated with a new access capability, a new sign-on platform, but there are significant improvements broken out into, productivity gains, being able to bring on new technologies, roll them out faster, less expensively, being able to improve reliability and uptime so that folks can get access into their applications. And Stephen, really the core, one of the big pieces around just the simple inefficiencies that are there with some of the legacy processes.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I just want to jump in again really quick. So it sounds like the ROI that you're talking about, it would be a huge driver for driving change. Is that right?
It is, and I think we saw on the poll too that cost reduction can drive change, but has to be tied to the strategic initiatives of the organization, whether that's fostering more innovative and broader research, right, or fostering student engagement and student experience to attract and retain those students. So it's critical to bring those in, but then you definitely have to justify in empowering those and enabling those with what the investment level looks like. And again, it's been, as we've worked with institutions, it's been hard for them to really sit down and look at their holistic cost about managing identities. It is identity processes as they've been built out and kind of hidden in various technologies and different groups within the institutions. It's hard for them to get their hands wrapped around what all are we spending? How much time is it really taking us to manage groups and roles and people? So we worked with Forrester Research and built out a model to assess cost based on true factors there for an institution, to build out and understand how much are we spending on identity today. And if we're really conservative and we look at modest improvements, what's the value or return? And I don't want to get into all the details, but it breaks down into core IT savings, right? Automating of processes. We got less people spending time on things that they have to spend on it today. On this example, we didn't even bring in where we can consolidate multiple technologies onto one identity platform, but that's real hard cost savings. Looking at increased productivity and then securing the environment. There's a cost for a breach beyond just the brand and of the institution. There's hard cost, and things we can do to nominally improve these things add up significantly and have absolutely helped folks think about a business case and putting that in front of a board or executive committee to look at this investment versus investing in other things. It's been really helpful as we've gone through these processes. to really understand what the impact's going to be for an institution. As we think about that infrastructure and platform, like what is needed from a system perspective to improve this engagement, help reduce these costs. And the first thing that comes to mind is an open platform. And by open, it means a system that is purpose-built to enable integrations to any technology. You know, as folks have moved through the life cycle of technology, today it's PeopleSoft, tomorrow it's Banner, maybe it's Workday, we're Office 365, we want to move to Google. It's incumbent to think about the path forward, not just where you are today, to be ready to adapt to any of those technologies and have an identity provider that's built to do that and have that flexibility for helping with, you know, future proofing. But also flexible to plug in and meet a lot of different diverse needs. Having a technology tied to one stack today that could change is a real challenge and limits your flexibility in how you want to move and adapt. But from a system perspective, to be able to enable these upstream folks, a campus or a department that needs to manage their own groups of users, maybe their own applications with some autonomy, but still be able to plug into a framework to access a shared application, whether that's in the cloud or something hosted on a service. So a student information system, HR, an LMS, or one of those. But really to be able to plug in users into that shared environment, but have them access it like it's their native own one, and making it much easier for the folks that administer those and manage those users to automatically put them in, have them moved off, and have the system office only have a few folks that have to manage that and have a plug and play way to get users in and users out and automate a lot of processes. And Stephen, this is where we've seen a lot of opportunity from systems to have a tighter integration across these and be able to have a lot less friction across how they're going to manage groups of users and applications.
You know, before we move on, you know, since our audience here, you know, they're from the higher ed space, do you think it would be possible, you know, if you could give us some examples maybe of this type of architecture in action, you know, at a college or university setting?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think the foundation of this can be split out two ways, but what we've seen is, especially from a system perspective, trying to find cost-saving opportunities to deliver the best technology at the best price for their employees and for students is identifying shared services. So again, back to a common HR system, a common learning management system, you name it. But to be able to enable a small group of folks to manage that infrastructure and platform and enable the campuses to plug into it, instead of each of the campuses needing to have their own staff to monitor and maintain it, they can get an economy of scale for you know, literally maintaining it. They also get an economy of scale from a purchase, right? They purchase a big bulk worth of people accessing a technology, they get a reduced price. So from an identity perspective, being able to easily plug in to that shared application makes it easier to deploy, more rapid. You've spent money on the application. We want people to deploy it very quickly, get up and running, and utilize that right as fast as possible. So one is with a shared service. But what we're also working on right now with several systems in colleges is not only accessing the shared service, but being able to share services and applications that are hosted by another campus. So we have a student in one campus that is taking the majority of their courses there. But maybe there's a cybersecurity campus or course provided by another campus. Well, traditionally, they would either have to do a lot of work to figure out how to get them into that campus, or maybe they'd have to go register with a separate course, a separate campus, but go way out of their way to get that one course because they can't afford to teach it everywhere. With this type of an infrastructure, that student could just log in as they always do, register for a course as if it was with their native campus, then get put right into it, get provisioned into that application, and seamlessly go in when they need to access it. When they're done with that course, or the time's out of it, they can deprovision them back out so they no longer have access. And now they continue on their way. And automating these processes is a huge area of opportunity for systems to look at how to make the most of a system of education to support their user community there. So we're really excited about that and what's coming down the pipe from that flexibility. So we've talked about platform a few times during the conversation, and when we talk about that, we really mean one screen, one management tool to go in to manage users, to manage how they access technologies, to manage their second factors, how they get in, the whole life cycle of these users, but a single place, purpose-built, easy to use, not program-driven coding to bring people on to manage all those various aspects and really separate identity as kind of a platform to allow it to plug into that ecosystem and that IT infrastructure much more seamlessly, and allow groups that don't have to be programming experts to drive change and push capabilities out to the groups that need to run them with an easy to use interface. Core to that is really the integrations that are built. Without something like an Okta, organizations are responsible for figuring out how to get users into all of these applications. And I basically see institutions running between 60 and 400 applications. Without something like Okta, they're plugging in and figuring out how each of them needs their users to go in. And as that application changes, they've got to figure out how to manage that process and keep it up to date, where Okta builds those connections, automates it, makes it really easy to manage. So you only have to plug into one thing instead of 400 of them. But also with these integrations offers a lot of really deep integrations with automations of processes and workflows into and out of these things. And really lastly is some of the innovations that come along with a modern identity platform. Workflows that Okta released about a year and a half ago or so is phenomenal, and we've got a lot of excitement about our university and college folks that are using this. Quite simply, it's just a drag and drop, plug and play way to build out detailed integrations and flows amongst and between different technologies that otherwise people would have to build really heavy duty programs to make them happen, and the cost and the talent to build those programs within to maintain them, and to be able to have a framework to plug this in has really driven some great innovations in both how they connect people to technologies, but also how they communicate to users around this framework.
Perfect. Thank you. Actually, before we go to this next poll question, something I can't help but think about. You said earlier about simplification. If you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about this? Share some examples of how this workflow capability ties back into that simplification focus of the digital strategy you talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we think about this integration of technologies that we need to move people in and out of, and trying to simplify the process to which you can move groups of users or bring on a new application, plugging in that identity framework and the workflows so that you can automate a process for request or for downstream applications. An example would be, you really would want, you put money into a ticketing system, a ServiceNow, a Team Dynamics, whatever it may be, and you're pushing folks to know one place to go in and make IT requests. With that, folks could go into that system, request a new application, or request to move a user to have access to a new group folder, or whatever it may be. But it's one place to communicate that business process, to communicate that make an ask with something like workflows within that tool, pushes it to the person that is responsible for managing that. It could check in to make sure who owns that group or who owns that application, sends a notification to them, they confirm it. Once they confirm using workflows, that request would come in, the person would automatically be put into that group, given access to it, and you could create a customized communication once they're in there that notifies them and can notify the group owner that they've joined this group and given them some instructions. So it's really exciting to see what this can do for automating those processes and simplifying the communication process and the operationalized side of these business processes.
Well, thank you very much for that. And as you can see, there's our last poll of the day. I'm going to launch in a few minutes just to let you know. Following this, we are going to have a Q&A session. So once you've finished answering the poll, please feel free to submit any questions that you have in the Q&A panel. Thank you very much. Just wait until you guys finish with the poll. All right, perfect. Let me share those with you.
Excellent. You know, Stephen, as we've had conversations as I've moved over to the identity world over the last 2 years, I've heard from a lot of folks that they say identity is a problem for us and we need to address it. And I've heard others that have been, put in for funding for improving it. And I do think that it is a known pain, a known challenge. It is, we've grown tremendously in higher education last year, I think maybe close to 500%. So this is a really hot topic. I think this also, the idea of this is, but not maybe necessarily a strategic initiative, that this is something worth spending some time to look at the real business case and making sure that the board level, chancellor, provost level really understands the opportunity and the return that can come from this. So not a huge surprise on the polling side there. I think it fits with what we've heard. So thank you everybody for your responses. So I'll share a few bits and pieces of information here, just as a walk away. One, highly encourage you or to have you share with anyone there that is interested in identity to attend Octane 21. It is our user-focused conference. It is the largest identity-focused conference going. It's April 6th through the 8th. We have some wonderful guest speakers coming on. I think you'd be really excited about, but you'll be able to go and hear from other higher education institutions around what they're doing, other commercial space that I think plays really well in what's going on, but definitely encourage that. There's a white paper around identity framework for higher education systems that really the core concept of this presentation came from. Encourage you to go look at that and a blog around it. We do have an upcoming webinar for Ursinus College to hear their identity journey. And then, please go to the higher education page at Okta to learn more.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much for that, Wes, for your expertise on all of this. Now, like I said earlier, we do have some time for a Q&A where Wes can answer any of the questions that you have. For those of you who have not yet submitted a question, you can do so now by just submitting your question in the Q&A panel, which again, you can find it in the lower right-hand side of your screen, like the chat panel. And if for whatever reason we don't get to your questions today, I'm sure that the team at Okta will answer your questions privately after today's event for sure. Now let's see, we do have one of the questions that came in is, how this particular institution can get started with identity modernization. So with that in mind, do you think that maybe you could provide some first steps for us, Wes?
Yeah, Stephen, absolutely. Unless you want to take that, I'll let you take that answer.
It's all you.
Okay, just checking. Um, yeah, absolutely. The first the first step that we generally take, besides kind of giving people an overview of what we do, is really looking at assessing what does their landscape look like today. What are their processes? We start with who are the user groups that they manage, where are their person records, how do they create them as an identity, how do they manage them into directories, what applications are mission critical, what are some of the critical processes that go to managing these folks, what is the user experience like to come onboarded as a student or a faculty, what does it look like for them if they need to request new applications, what does it look like when they sign on, but getting a holistic picture of their architecture, the amount of effort it takes them and time and what the challenges are, what works well, what doesn't work well, and then what's the experience like for users or for other administrators to manage that process. And with that, we can really start to frame out the priorities of what needs to be done. We can couple that with some of their other technology projects that are going on that this needs to fit into, and come up with a real vision for that. And from there, start to really look at building out a business case. Assuming we go down this path, what is the expected return specifically for that institution based on these use cases. So we build that up, but the very first step is really understanding how do you do things today and what would it look like in the future.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And thanks for answering that instead of me. Another question that we had that came in seems to be about, how much heavy lifting is involved, in managing, especially after a system like Okta has been set up. So they are asking, how many dedicated people are needed, once something like this has been implemented.
Yeah, partially a trick question, but the answer of it depends, fits. But what we've seen is an ability to significantly reduce man-hour time. And whether that's 40, 50, 70% of time, a little TBD on depending on what all you're replacing and what all you're doing. But we've had a number of interviews with Okta institutions, one of them with 3 of the Cal State schools. And each of them shared that once they moved over to Okta, they have less than a full-time equivalent managing it. They may have a primary and a backup or two, but they were estimating anywhere between maybe a quarter of their time to maybe half of a person's time to manage that environment. And this is significantly less than current processes. So I think that's probably one of the best reference points to point back to.
Perfect. And we have one last question that came in. So once Wes is finished answering this, if there's still time, if you'd like to submit a question before we wrap up, please do so again by just going to the bottom right-hand side of your screen and clicking on that Q&A expand triangle and inserting your question there, and I'll read it off for Wes. So this last question that we have, one audience member, they mentioned that their institution seems to have been reluctant to, move identity to the cloud. And the main reason seems like they are concerned about security more than anything else. So with that in mind, how is Okta, addressing these concerns at other institutions like they are?
Yeah, and we do get that. I think that concern is less and less of a concern, but it definitely still comes up, just less frequently. I think as folks have gotten more comfortable in the cloud in general, in banking in the cloud, purchases, that's helped. But when you think about identities and access to applications in the cloud, it's well worth a look from that. I will say that if you think about an ecosystem of an institution, especially a system, but just an institution, there are so many points of entry to get access to the network and to application that are risky, as opposed to a single place that is purpose built for security. With Okta, we've met certifications for FedRAMP and HIPAA. We have federal agencies, banks, very high secure environment. We have to take trust and security extremely serious. And we have a huge team dedicated to security that I don't think a university could match in terms of the level of effort we put into that. So I do think that, with the background, and I encourage you to go look at Okta's security page and the trust page there to get a better feel for it. But that is actually, and there's a lot of articles out now that have pointed to the fact that this cloud enablement can be much more secure than an on-prem one. But a great question, Stephen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And it looks like that was our last question today. So thank you again, Wes. We really appreciate your time here today and sharing your expertise as well. And I'm sure our audience does. And again, while we wrap things up here, if anything last minute does pop to mind, you can just put them in the Q&A, and then following this, the team at Okta will get back to you privately after this event. And, that said, I would also like to thank all of you, our attendees, for joining us today. For those of you who especially enjoyed it, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by here at University Business, which, as you know, at UB, we are the leader in editorial coverage of news, in addition to trends and current issues in higher ed. Our wide range of readers subscribe for free to UB, and they stay up to date with us through our print magazine, University Business, as well as the digital edition of UB, our newsletters, including UB Daily, our daily newsletter, and UB Tech, which it features the most relevant ed tech stories in higher ed, and in addition to web seminars like this one. Also, one last thing on this last slide here, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again, or for those of you maybe who believe that the solutions provided here would be helpful to your colleagues, you will be pleased to know that an archive recording, on-demand recording of this web seminar will be available at the URL, which you can see on your screen here. And you can also expect to receive an email from our team at UB later today, tomorrow, which will include a link to all the slides here. And so with that, on behalf of University Business, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks everyone for coming, and have a great spring semester. Take care, be well, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.